This is a video about my own personal story of coming to realize who I was, and not all narratives are the same, so take it as you will. If it helps you, good. If it doesn't, I'm sorry. I'll offer you a hug from where I am, but that's all I really have for you. After all, we are not all of the same hive mind, and we feel differently about certain topics. We haven't all had the same experiences. And you know what? That's okay. It is nearly a fact of life that as a trans person, you're going to be asked, how did you know you were trans? That's not necessarily a bad thing, because I myself as a kid would have liked to know somebody that would answer that question for me. Although I do still remember the first time that I was asked that question. It was in October 2014, and a friend of mine that I had recently come out to, he came over and we got on the subject of pronouns and names, and eventually, of course, the question came up. I knew with him it was from a place of compassion. He wanted to connect and understand a little more, so of course I obliged with the basics. This is the longer version of what I essentially told him, and hopefully it gives you some insights. Now that most of the trolls are gone because they wouldn't have watched past all of that, we can get started. As I stated in my video on local ordinances, my father used to read to me. It was often from the Bible, so that he could teach me the morals and ethics that he valued in his own life. He would read a sentence, highlight it, then read it again, and sometimes ask me for clarification to see whether or not I fully understood it. I was very young during all of that, 3 to 4 years old starting out, and it was essentially like teaching a parrot new words. He would do this sometimes with other books surrounding his Bible. One of them I remember was Signs and Symbols of the Occult, and the other was The World's Most Dangerous Secret Societies. This is what I was given to nourish my growing mind with. Luckily, the material was sufficiently advanced that I was able to go and read on my own as well. I had an entire bookshelf full of books, and I read through them multiple times. It got to the point where my parents couldn't keep up with my reading habits, and eventually they subscribed to things like zoo books and other different science facts, which I assume that my mother did that and not my father. In fact, one of my favorite ones was on black holes, and I tried so hard to understand that card. I'm pretty sure I even still have it somewhere, but that's how I got outside information that was not just that parroting. However, even that wasn't good enough, so oftentimes I would go out into the neighborhood and meet people, whether they were older or younger than me, but I would try and get information out of them as well. When I was between 4 and 5, I asked him what the difference between a man and a woman was, and he responded that a woman lies on her back and a man does all the work while they're trying to make a baby or have sex. I sought an answer to this question because I didn't feel connected to any of the boys I was making friends with. They were all cruel and crude, and I just didn't really like them. Of course, I also didn't feel connected to my dad either, so naturally I was wondering if I really fell into that category. However, I accepted what my dad said and assumed that that was the natural order for men and women. Men perform and women lay. Considering it for myself, I didn't really feel any connection to performing, so I assumed that I was a girl and eventually I would develop into a woman, and that would be it. No one considered me that at that time, but it didn't matter. I was going to blossom once puberty hit, and that would be it. Of course, in kindergarten, I began to talk to friends about this, because kids love to gossip about what they've learned. I very quickly found out that this wasn't all there was to it, and that perhaps there was something different about me. Even though I was around 5 or 6 at that time, I no longer trusted my parents to give me the full story on things like that. So instead, I went to my mother's bookshelf and got a medical textbook and flipped through the pages to see if there was anything that seemed relatable. Didn't find anything in that volume, so I went to the next one, which of course contained P, V, and S. The first thing that I found was sex, and then I researched that topic within that book. Whenever there was a word I didn't understand, I tried to cross-reference it as best I could, and slowly I developed an idea of what genitals were, and of what puberty was. I soon realized that all of the changes that I didn't want were going to happen regardless. At that point in time, I began to have an existential crisis as a toddler. It was far beyond my years and capability of understanding exactly what was going on, and why all of this was happening to me. Honestly, after learning what would happen as I aged, I never wanted to grow up. I never wanted to see another year go by. As a kid, I longed for something, anything, to take me away. I began to do dangerous things to myself, and eventually it developed into paranoia, where I began to hallucinate things like skeletons in my room, monsters in the clothes bin, or monsters in the cabinets. And that's generally something kids go through, but it was because I wanted something to take me away and extinguish my light. At the age of 6, I was still in denial about that destiny, and I had a friend spend the night. He was about a year older than me, and he informed me that one of his friends, that was also a mutual friend, had shown herself to him, and he asked if I wanted to play in the same way. At that point in time, I thought I was one of the men that lay with men that the Bible preached against. So, of course, I was interested in experiencing that, because maybe that was my path. After that, it didn't change how I felt about who I was, and it didn't make the crisis feel any less looming. So, I thought maybe it was a bad experience. Maybe I was still gay, and now I'm going to hell. At the age of 7, I took that confusion with me whenever my parents divorced, and I carried that unawareness whenever I spoke to the gay cisgender friend that I met at that point in time that thought I was just one confused gay boy. As my body changed, I felt like my mind was dying inside of a vessel that continued to progress without its owner. I was a doll that was being morphed in negative and positive ways. The positive ways I couldn't even celebrate because they didn't belong to the correct category, and they were also overshadowed by the negative. I still cared about my inner self, and I continued to nourish it by hiding behind information, whether it be books or computer screens. Before I ever got into the 6th grade, I discovered porn. Of course, that was a very easy way to explore what made me tick and what my sexuality was. During that time of stumbling through the internet, I found cross-dressing, and while it was interesting, it didn't scratch the itch that I had. I didn't feel connected to that. Whenever someone showed me 4chan in 2006, I finally found people that were self-described as traps. Of course, many of them were trans women, but not all of them. Some of them were just really attractive cross-dressers. Found out other hangout spots where they went and began to gather more information about how I felt. Of course, I continued to wash back and forth between whether I was just attracted to them or whether I felt like I was one. That continued on for years, and I tried my damnedest to continue on and see if the role that I had been given would ever fit. However, as I got into my 20s and got closer and closer to being on this earth for a quarter of a century, I began to feel less and less connected to my accomplishments, school, and work. My emotional instability began to grow worse, and it tainted my ability to do research, and my grades began to slip. I quit my job figuring that was a major stressor, and that without it, I could bring everything back up and things should go okay. My grades continued to falter, and I got the first C of my life in vector calculus, and I felt like I was distracted. I just couldn't get my mind off of this feeling of not being myself. Once I had quit researching and school improved a bit, I thought maybe I could wait if I just told my mom. So I wrote her an emotional letter and gave it to her on 2 a.m. after Mother's Day. And her reaction was lukewarm. I joined another research group and I tried going again, just so I could make it through and continue on with my plan. However, on November 3rd, 2014, after having numerous bad days, I attempted to overdose. It's been a year and 2 months on HRT, and I finally feel like myself. In fact, nothing bothers me the way it used to, and it is wonderful. That is not how everybody feels, but it helped me. I can't say that it's been all butterflies and rainbows, because it hasn't, but what I used to get upset at and feel bad about in the past no longer bothers me. I can very easily shrug things off and let things go, compared to how I used to be. And it's a wonderful feeling, having come that far. If you are trying to find yourself, I would say try finding other people that feel similar ways to you, and figure out what they think. Figure out how they have done what they did. Build yourself a support group with friends of all sorts, both in the real world and online. Begin to take actions that you can manage that will make you feel more comfortable in your meat suit. Because honestly, there's no experience quite like finally being yourself. With that, I hope you stay safe and know that you are incredible. And until next time, bye.